We are right now at a point of crisis in consciousness, and it might feel like you're rebelling against all of the belief systems, or it's more like your soul is rebelling against those belief systems that have kind of already shaped and formed the consensus and have been leading you on the path that you're on. And all of a sudden, there's this really strong awareness of everything that is still unfulfilled and all of the potential, but at the same time, perhaps the pain of how to actually utilize that potential, and a feeling that it might be really difficult right now to understand what actually is needed to fulfill a sense of purpose, but it's a sense of purpose that is really expanding beyond what you maybe thought the purpose was. So we have a full moon on November 5th, and this is a very intense one, I feel. It's also a super moon, meaning that the moon is especially close to the earth. We feel the magnetic energies really strongly. I'm gonna take you through some of the aspects that we are seeing, help us all make sense of this, and remind you of what you can do to support yourself through this time. Let me begin with the moon and the sun. They are, of course, in opposition. The sun is in Scorpio. It's already intense. We're really aware of the things that have been hidden, of the energetic and emotional perspective of the situations. Opposite to that, we have moon in Taurus, so we already have the contradiction of what is material, what is immaterial. We have also the conflict of a desire to feel physical, material safety, and on the other hand, the almost painful awareness of immaterial truth, of constant fluctuation, of constant cycling and recycling, of death, of loss, of rebirth that comes forth afterwards. But it's, I think, a challenging time where we are really confronted with what actually can we trust, what can we rely on. What's interesting about this opposition is that we have a trine to the south node from the moon and a sextile from the sun to the south node. And on the other side, we have a sextile from the moon to the north node and a trine from the sun to the north node. So this is what you would call a mystic rectangle. We have the understanding of maybe being able to intuitively grasp, feel, and kind of analyze the reasons for growth, why we are being pushed into this extreme discomfort. And at the same time, with the trine between moon and south node, I think we're also willing to use the skills that we have and willing to also go into maybe even old behaviors in order to self-soothe. And maybe that's okay for this moment to kind of self-regulate, but finding this balance of the new, of the old. So while still indulging perhaps in things that are kind of like short-term sensational calming methods, ultimately those need to also be attuned with understanding the value and the purpose, the emotional value, the energetic impact of what that will have on your life. Cultivating a compassion for also being able to utilize your strengths, right? We don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. We can also just utilize the wheel that's already there, but maybe we need to give the wheel a different direction. With this Scorpio and Taurus energy, I also feel that we are really reflecting how things make us feel in the physical world and what is actually the underlying emotional energy that is being presented to us. And I experience this a lot in my life right now through questioning art and questioning artistic expression, questioning material expression, and questioning the desire of the body to live out certain experiences and sensations, and understanding the kind of impact that has on an energetic subconscious level, and also understanding what lies underneath those desires. So being willing also to ask uncomfortable questions of like, what foundations is this built on? What emotional foundations is this built on? What kind of invisible systems are behind this this way of living, this way of acting, this way of wanting to sensorially explore? And I think it's very difficult to criticize art and to question art, and maybe a lot of us are afraid of it because art is supposed to be this place where we are just free and all expressions are just welcome, and it's the one area where there should be no censorship. And at the same time, I think it's also really important to understand historical context, to understand cultural conditioning, and to evaluate whether certain forms of artistic expression are continuing and contributing to emotions that are manipulative, that are harmful, that are dangerous, and what place, what role do we give them in our physical world, in our society, in our value systems. So it's not about censoring art, it's more about understanding what place and role do we give which artistic expressions. And with the context of the nodes, of course, asking like, where are we bringing these energies? What role do they play in our strive towards collective liberation, towards collective consciousness, the evolution of that? And we need to really dig deep sometimes to understand why even are we as a society have formed and shaped this consensus of what is good, what is bad, what is provocative, what is old school, what is new, what is innovative, all of those questions. Because the truth is that everything is relative, right? So we need to understand how that relative answer was derived. So asking what kind of future is this leading us towards? And also asking, of course, what do we need to be able to lead ourselves into the future that we do want? And understanding what are the collective and subconscious beliefs that these values are built upon, and also which values do we want to build, so which collective and subconscious beliefs do we need in order to support the building and strengthening of that, to be able to really integrate it into our movements, into our physical experience, into our sensational experience, and into the artistic expressions that we also bring into the world and that we value, that we highlight. Another really prominent aspect that we have with this full moon is a cardinal cross between Venus on one side, Chiron on the opposite side, Libra and Aries. And then we have in Cancer also Jupiter, and the fourth placement of this cross is Pluto, which is not exactly in the same opposite sign as Cancer. That would be Capricorn, but it's actually already in the first degree of Aquarius. But by the degrees, it's still in opposition. So this is a cardinal cross with also a little bit of fixed energy that comes through that Pluto placement. And this, I feel, is a very intense aspect that we're all already feeling. Venus opposing Chiron is, of course, challenging. I think we're really being questioned about our inner voice and where we allow ourselves to be influenced by others, and how we kind of find the balance between wanting to isolate ourselves and just completely separate, and wanting to go completely into something and into interactions, with this fear of losing ourselves, of losing our voice, of losing our natural way of being and behaving. And maybe there have been some changes in life recently where you feel like you're more constricted than you were perhaps a few months ago, and that may cause this friction. And with that Chiron in Aries, it's going to trigger feelings of questioning, what is my ability, what can I do, how individual can I be, is my own truth valid or valuable? And it might bring up a lot of questions around self-confidence, around what you believe in that you can do, and what you believe about your own importance, about your own worth. Or also it could bring up topics of dependency and codependency, independency. So questioning, am I able to live without this, or do I need this, and how does that make me feel? I think it's going to address a lot of topics of justice as well. Of course, with Libra here, we have these like contracts and this way of functioning, and the topic of equality. So understanding, like, can I live out certain expressions without losing a sense of control, without losing a sense of justice? And I think there's going to be a lot of back and forth trying to figure out what those answers can be with Jupiter in Cancer. Yeah, we really have a desire, like Jupiter is exalted there in Cancer, and Venus is also the ruling planet of Libra. So this might be a square, but I think it still has some like very positive quality as well, because the planets themselves are feeling quite empowered. And with Jupiter in Cancer, of course, we're really like willing to open and expand. We're willing to feel, we're willing to do the emotional work. But that requires perhaps sometimes a feeling of needing to make compromises that then lead us into this intense questioning of ourselves and of our whole life and our entire identity, and also brings up real feelings of threat, of being threatened, and maybe even recreating experiences that you promised yourself you wouldn't ever allow to happen again, or that you really didn't want to ever experience again. So it's also about, of course, realizing with different contexts, what level of compromise are we able to make, right? Of course, to not bring yourself into, situations that are abusive and that are extremely harmful, and then discerning which situations are not actually that threatening, which situations are not actually that harmful anymore, or perhaps have never been. So everyone's gonna find themselves on different areas of the spectrum of life. So it's very important to discern. Not everyone is gonna have the same realization at this time of needing to make a certain compromise or not. And so Venus in Libra, from the point of view of evolutionary astrology, is also really concerned with trying to figure out when to isolate and when to socialize, and how to withdraw in order to feel yourself, and then also how to go into contact in order to understand yourself through those interactions. And in order to evolve that awareness, to become more mature in that Libra area, it's good to integrate those areas, qualities that are in the opposite part of the spectrum. So to really understand that your individual needs matter, and how to cultivate being able to listen to your own inner voice. So being able to hear yourself, hear your inner truth, and understand your own values, your own needs outside of being in relation to something or someone else. It's also then about using that in order to stay more centered in all of the interactions and in the situations and in the extremes. So fostering that connection to yourself, that self-knowledge and that identity, which is difficult right now because that's exactly where Chiron is right now, right? So there's a lot of questioning and doubting your own identity and your capacity and what you can do, what your needs are, and your worth and your values and your ability, your capacity to turn them into reality and to kind of demand that they also are met. That is exactly the pain point right now. It could also be simply about reiterating the way in which those needs are expressed, and reiterating the way in which you also communicate those needs and that sense of justice and fairness. Because from the place from which we are wounded, of course, we have natural tendencies to over-explain. We have a tendency to justify. We have also perhaps been training ourselves to become super defensive, and that might turn also into aggressiveness. So to also be aware of how you're communicating, and to notice when certain types of communication are not actually strengthening the justice, are not actually strengthening the equality, and when they are needed in order to demand justice and equality. So there's going to be different answers for different topics as well. And so with Pluto, of course, in that square as well, there's this intense energy of wanting to evolve, but that kind of requires really looking at and experiencing these darker aspects of self and learning how to integrate that darkness, learning how to go through this really underworld experience where you're not able to see things in the same way, you're not able to express or experience things in the same way. There might be a sense of loss of freedom, and it might feel violent and angry. It might feel really scary and fearful. And then ultimately understanding how to utilize those experiences to bring consciousness into a higher awareness. And Pluto is also sextiling Mars and Mercury that are both in Sagittarius. So that's also bringing the opportunity to utilize really that energy of Sagittarius, which is able to go beyond, that is able to learn and be inspired by something new. And that is also able to see the horizon and really understand the larger goal that is here. The larger goal that you can make, that you can see. The larger goal that you can decide to move towards, that will help you to zone in and out of what is happening, to help you to regulate the emotional experience in that moment as well. Because when you do have the ability to zone out and to see a larger goal, it gives you the necessary perspective to just reflect upon your decisions and your choices and your way of communicating. With Mercury there as well, it's also about learning how to communicate to people outside of that experience that you are having. So I think that also is an invitation to learn the necessary language and communication skills to be able to make the points that you want to make. And understanding that sometimes it's not because the point is not important or because the person isn't willing to listen, but actually that there might be a communication barrier. So it could be helpful to learn how to communicate in a new language. Like it could be literally a new language, but it could also be a new way of speaking. It could be incorporating words or the language that that people of a certain field typically use so that they see you in a different way. It could be also changing the tone of how you speak, or changing the order of how the expressions are brought. So all of that can be helpful also in understanding how to mitigate some of these challenging situations in which the goal is to establish a new sense of balance and equality and justice, and all of those aspects can help you to achieve that. And that brings me to the last really important aspect I want to mention today. That is all connected with Mars. I mean, it's actually two aspects, but Mars is always kind of there, really prominent. And one is a grand trine between Mars and Mercury. They're in Sagittarius, but they're actually trining because they're in 0 degrees and in 5 degrees. So it's almost like Mars just came out of Scorpio energy. In trine, we have in Pisces, Saturn and Neptune. Saturn in 25, Neptune in 29. They're both retrograding right now. And in trine with that as well, we have Jupiter in Cancer in 24 degrees. So it's almost a grand water trine, except that there's fire as well. And that makes it a very interesting aspect because there's a lot of energetic flow, and at the same time there's this kind of like, as I just mentioned, this miscommunication topic a little bit, because fire has a different approach to things than water. And while water is really focused on understanding and alchemizing and holding space and feeling and kind of slowly changing, really being able to grasp all that information, fire is really interested in quickly burning and dissolving and being dramatic and loud and impulsive. I think when we stop trying to see these things as problematic differences, but instead we start asking how can those different approaches maybe complement each other? How can we be inspired by each other? So how can Mars and Mercury, with this dramatic, impulsive, fiery energy, how can that be an inspiration to the emotional world? Maybe that's what the emotions need. Maybe instead of just feeling all the time, we also really need to get that spark of action. And now we're being reminded that yes, feeling and feeling and feeling and feeling these really slow moving planets also, right? Jupiter moves slow, Neptune moves super slow, Saturn, and they're retrograding and coming back again. So they're just like such a long time that they're spending in these degrees of Pisces already. And now Mercury and Mars are like, yes, we're in a trine, we are all like working together, we want to be harmonious, but let's just like take it to the next level. Let's do some fire. Like let's get moving. Let's start going. Let's take some actions. Like let's just take a different approach. Let's invite in some passion. Come on, let's go. And let's move. Let's go beyond the horizon. Let's go out of the feeling zone into the fiery expression. Let's feel alive again. Let's use that emotion, but let's also feel alive. And that reminds me of something that I recently heard actually someone say. It was, I think, on Instagram, a reel by the Erotics of Liberation account. And this person was saying, or was providing the advice or the suggestion to invite in the perspective of not only wanting to die for a cause that like you feel so passionate about, but actually wanting to live for it instead. And the importance of inviting in that wanting to live for something, and understanding also the importance of that you have so much energy and so much passion about this change, that you should make sure that you are alive to change it, which means you also need to self-care, you also need to regulate, and you need to make sure that you're healthy so that you can also be the burning passion for this cause. And I thought that was, a beautiful little insight that I find kind of applies to this trine experience right now. And so Mars is a really, really interesting key factor with this full moon, I feel. First of all, Mars is in 0 degrees. That's 0 degrees. That's the first degree of a sign. That is like full commitment, full potential. And as opposed to like the 29th degree, which brings a lot of urgency of like, we have to finish this right now. This is kind of the opposite energy that brings us a lot of opening and not necessarily a slowness, but I feel it more as just like the possibilities that are inspiring and understanding that it's just the beginning. So we might still feel the urgency due to some of the other aspects, but I feel that also we're noticing, okay, it feels like the end, but actually this is just the beginning. This is actually only the beginning. And it's kind of both, and I'll explain why in a few moments. But that Mars in 0 degrees is directly in opposition to Uranus in 0 degrees. Those are 2 key planets in 0 degrees opposite of each other. Uranus is retrograding right now, and it's in Gemini. And I think that's a really important moment. It's like we have these 2 energies that are really pointing us to this whole axis, this spectrum of the zodiac is where we are actually just beginning to learn something, and that is communication, right? That is the small details of communication, the fun, the laughter, the way of shifting perspectives back and forth, being lighthearted about things, being also able to understand the details of like specific things. And the whole spectrum goes all the way to the other side of being able to understand nothing specific, but the grand whole picture, the abstract words and forms, and being able to communicate not only in a lighthearted way, but in a really profound way. Not necessarily serious and strict and stern, but serious as in a sense of a wise elderly way. And we're actually just beginning to learn this right now. We are going to experience a huge shift in our consciousness. And this is mutable energy. This is the mutable axis. So this is also reminding us that we are just beginning a journey of really understanding how to be flexible with our minds and with our communication. How to communicate in ways that are maybe sometimes a bit different from how we are usually communicating, but also how to incorporate ideas into ourselves and what we're talking about that are maybe outside of the norm of what we usually tend to hyper focus on. With Uranus and Gemini, the details are really unpredictable at the moment. We just can't understand the details. And so right now, focusing on trying to micromanage your whole life and your next steps and trying to figure out all of the details and have control over what every little thing means might be just the road that is going to lead to a lot of sudden changes and disappointments. But Mars in Sagittarius is showing us the way right now of we don't need to understand all the details. We need to get focused again on the bigger picture. We need to get focused again on what is beyond the horizon. What do we want? And I think also from a perspective of us as a species, like what are we actually here to do? Are we here to just like create these personal lives where maybe you have success or you have like a feeling of success or you have a good job, or you maybe, do something nice for the neighborhood, or you grow up, you raise children that are good people. But then as a consciousness, as a species, what are we actually doing? What is our role here on the planet? Why are we on Earth? What is our role, or what is the goal that we want to achieve, connecting to the health of the planet? Or our generation in the next 2,000 years? What do we want to provide for people in the future as well as for my personal future? So this is really an invitation to understand that you're just at the beginning of asking these questions right now, but ask them and let that ignite you and let yourself be inspired by things outside of your box, especially right now, and let that passion help you to actually utilize the emotions that we're feeling so strongly to do something with them. Yeah, I just realized that this is also exactly what the course is about that I'm offering right now. I don't know when you're watching this video, it might be a bit late, but we're starting on November 9th, so if there's still time, you're welcome to join. And it's actually a course about self-healing and understanding all the underlying emotions and root causes of why those things, those diseases, those pains, that illness is expressing in your body, is manifesting physically. And so utilizing all of that understanding to then move and to then actually take the steps that you need in order to support your immune system and change the things in your life that need to be adapted for you to be able to actually cultivate that health again, that feeling of vitality. I'll put the information below. So if you're ready for some changes in your physical health and your emotional health, then I invite you to have a look, and perhaps you feel inspired to join us in the next weeks on this beautiful journey together. And so Mars in Sagittarius, from an evolutionary astrology perspective, is also about integrating the wisdom of Gemini in order to mature that Sagittarius realization and understanding, that energy. So also being aware of how your belief systems and what conclusion you come to is perhaps not the only way of seeing things. It's not the only truth, and it's not the only road or path that leads to the goal that you have. It's about making space for that Gemini understanding of perspectives and of being able to shift back and forth between them. Understanding that many paths can actually lead to a similar or to the same goal even. And ultimately being able to transcend also personal frustrations that come with this feeling of like, oh, I'm enlightened and I know it all, and other people, they don't see my perspective, or they don't understand that this is the truth. And making space for the fact that perhaps it is not the only truth, and perhaps there is a valid reason for those other people to do their way and to see their perspective, that it could maybe also support you to be able to include that in your awareness, in your scope of understanding, and ultimately transcend those frustrations, transcend the constant need to be right in discussions and to debate everything, or being frustrated that other people aren't willing to take the same path or to go in the same tempo as you. And understanding how those reactions are also based on your internal need for safety and security, and kind of exploring that, how also your personal ego, when we go back looking at Chiron and Venus there in Libra and Aries, how your personal ego, how your wounds, how your fears and your sense of justice is kind of playing into those reactions as well. And I want to read you shortly the Sabian symbols for where Mars and Uranus are, this first degree of Sagittarius and Gemini, because it's really, really interesting. So for Sagittarius, we have in the first degree, retired army veterans gather to reawaken old memories. The will to reaffirm value of struggle upon which civilization and group achievements are founded. So this is an energy that kind of like wants to bathe in the old energies and really reconnect with the sense of passion and necessity and urgency that was able to like create essentially, war, because in this symbol is like about talking about retired army veterans, right? So this idea of like wanting to protect and create a better future. But I feel like at this moment, ultimately, with Chiron in Aries and Venus and Libra in opposition to that, with the Grand Cross to Jupiter and Pluto, we're also really asking ourselves, is this like the better future that we wanted? Is this even the path to a better future? And as I just mentioned, bringing in that awareness, maybe we want a better future and the whole time we thought that this was the road, but actually there are like 3 other roads that we can take that will all lead to the better future, but actually they will have less pain on them. They will have less destruction on them. They will have less extraction on them. And I think a big topic, of course, is war, is like understanding, okay, we have Chiron, this Aries placement is also questioning and making us really aware of how painful it actually is to be warriors, to actually fight. That energy itself causes so much pain, and questioning whether that is actually the future that we want, and if there is not an alternative way. Of course there's an alternative way, but understanding how do we get to that realization. And so, of course, opposite to that, Uranus in the first degree of Gemini, the Sabian symbol reads, a glass-bottomed boat reveals undersea worlds. The revelation of unconscious energies and submerged psychic structures. And that is precisely what we need to see and understand and be looking at in order to understand also which fires are actually moving us in which directions, and why do we feel a need to want to rekindle them, to want to bathe in those memories and bring up again old passions. Being able to understand what are the psychic structures underneath those, where do they come from, who strengthened them, why did you choose to strengthen those structures, or who from the outside was influencing you to do that subconsciously. Of course, on an individual and on a collective level, who are the people influencing and interested in maintaining those fires, so to move people in those directions. And now we need to really do the work of understanding and realizing, hey, there are several other paths that we can take here. This is not the only path, and this is not the only truth. There is, in fact, relativity, and the paths that stem from other beliefs and structures, they are built differently. They have different experiences, but maybe they also bring us to the outcome of what we think a better future looks and feels like. This Mars is really prominent right now, and in the relation to Pluto, we also have evolutionary phases. And when we look at where Mars is right now, Mars is approaching Pluto. It's going to get closer and closer in the next months, and actually is right now in what in evolutionary we call the phase of the last quarter. And in this phase, it's all about understanding that we are in a process of shedding our skin like a snake, because we realize that the belief systems are not always working, and there's an intrinsic sense of wanting to rebel against that, needing to rebel against that, needing to shed yourself from that, so that you can actually connect with the bigger cosmic meaning again. It's about reconnecting yourself with truths that are based on nature, and truths that are based on the laws of the universe and the laws of physics, and to understand which belief systems fit those truths, and which belief systems are not really long-term gonna need to be there. And so those are the ones that we can also just let go of, especially if they've been harmful. It's also bringing us this feeling that we're about to close a cycle, a really important cycle. And so now it's we're suddenly really aware of everything that hasn't been achieved, that hasn't been fulfilled, and it might create a sense of sadness and grief around longings and ideas and visions that we feel like we've kind of gotten off of the path of that. And I think it's a really important experience to feel that and to utilize that, to not just go into grieving and blaming yourself and shaming and go kind of into a state of freeze and isolation, but to use that in order to shift your values, to realign with that, and remember, okay, that was actually what was important to me. That means that I make that important again now. And collectively, our souls are kind of in a strong process of reorientation right now, where it's we're wanting to reconnect with the timeless, universal, cosmic meaning of what it means to exist, and why are we here? What are we doing here as humans? Why are we here? And is this really fulfilling? And is this actually an experience that we even find valuable? And if we don't, that's a really strong signal that we're not fulfilling our true desires here. And of course, the solution to that is not to just leave and go and stop and give up. The solution of that is to figure out what are those true desires, and how can we actually get closer to living and experiencing and manifesting them into existence. Yeah, so bigger feelings, bigger topics of the cosmos, of the soul in relation to that, and your role as an individual in the cosmos. And so to sum it up and round it off, I want to bring it back one last time to the moon and the sun. Also quickly share the Sabian symbols for those placements right now. For the moon in Taurus, we have the symbol on the beach. Children play while shellfish grope at the edge of the water, returning to simpler joys for revitalization. Where the sun is sitting in Scorpio, we have the symbol of telephone line men at work installing new connections. The need to establish new channels of communication. And I think this is beautiful and at the same time a bit challenging because, yeah, returning to simpler joys for revitalization. What are those simpler joys? To not confuse them with joys that you think are joyous, but that are actually not truly joyful. And I think that right now it's going to be really helpful to connect with the simple things that are universally joyful, that are based on the universal principles of connecting with, of nature, of having fresh air, being outside, getting grounded by the frequencies of the earth, being in movement for the body, allowing the body to move, wanting to express, maybe wanting to sing, maybe wanting to dance, maybe wanting to do some art, all of those things. But yeah, some of those joys that you think are joyful for you, you need to check and perhaps apply the opposite here, the need to establish new channels of communication. And I think with this symbol, it's very interesting because these new channels of communication, they're not just coming on their own, they're being installed by people, by humans. So it's us installing these new channels of communication. It's something that we actively do. And we do that because we understand how signals work, how systems work, how lines work, how telephone connections work, how that connection is actually established. So of course we need an awareness, we already need an understanding of those things in order to understand where to plug in the channels. I mean, I don't remember when this book was written, but yeah, nowadays it works a bit different with mobile. But essentially it's still the same. We need to understand how the energy is moved, how the signals are being sent, where the satellites need to be, where the lines need to be built, and what numbers need to be put in place so that actually these communications can happen. So there's a lot of knowledge preceding the process of being able to install those connections. So it's also right now a time of learning. With Mars and Sagittarius is the time of educating yourself, of learning, of being in exchange, staying in discourse about all those topics, and yeah, ultimately reframing also the necessities of life to really connect again with universal principles, with natural law, and bringing in all of those aspects and components into the picture, giving them value, giving them importance. And I want to leave it at that for today. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening. I'd love to hear about your experiences right now, your wisdom. If you want to share some comments down below, I'd be super happy to read them and respond. And as I mentioned already, the link for my course, a 6-week Heal Your Immune System, Support Your Self-Healing Powers course. All the information will be down below. We're beginning on November 9th. And if you don't have time right now, that's fine. There's going to be another one in the first months of the new year probably. So if you want to put yourself on a list to receive the information for when that course is being launched, you can also do that. Thank you all so much for listening. This is The Web of Wonder. My name is Jennifer Irene, and I'm so happy that you're here. I hope to see you soon again. And until then, I wish you all the best and a beautiful integration time with these energies. Lots of love from me to you. Goodbye.